All right, guys, well, welcome to episode 7 of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake KEARNAN, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, MARTYN Sadler. MARTYN, how was your weekend?
Oh, it was great, Jake. Yeah, it was great. Actually, Sunday, as always, was spent here putting League Express together. But no, I thought it was a great weekend of rugby. Actually, in both hemispheres, wasn't it? There was some great rugby on in the NRL and some spectacular stuff in Super League as well. So I think we're pretty fortunate to be interested in what I think is such a great game.
Oh, exactly right. It's an exciting time of year, that's for sure.
Certainly is.
And obviously a lot goes into League Express. If anyone would like to grab themselves a copy or sign up for a subscription, you can head along to www.totalrl.com/shop. While you're there, we may as well plug the Rugby League World magazine as well. The September issue is available. You can head along to that same www.totalrl.com/shop to grab your copy, and that would also be in most newsagents across.
No, it isn't. It's subscription only. Actually, is that magazine? Yeah,
no worries. But the League Express,
yeah, that's hopefully in lots of newsagents.
Yeah,
you can never say for sure where it'll be, but certainly in most newsagents in the north of England and supermarkets, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I grabbed my copy of League Express from the Armdale shopping centre down in Manchester. So
that's good. I'm delighted. And you had quite a bit in the paper this week, Jake.
Yeah, so
your first ever match report for League Express.
That's right. Hopefully the readers enjoyed it, and I did an okay job, and hopefully I get a call back to.
Well, I don't think anybody would have expected you to have to report on 11 Warrington tries, would they?
Yeah, absolutely right. I was sitting there, and obviously, as you do, you try and take down a few notes of every try and how it was scored, and I found myself continuously looking down, typing, and every time I'd look back up, it seemed like Warrington were crossing for another try.
We could have written the whole paper, couldn't you, on that game, I think.
No, so it was very exciting stuff and an incredible atmosphere.
How does the atmosphere compare to what you normally used to in Australia?
I think that here in England, there's definitely more songs, more chants. I think that English games have an ability to have, say, 5,000 to 10,000 at a stadium, but make it sound like it's 20,000 to 30,000.
Yes. Particularly when they're winning.
That's right. So for me, I've been at some pretty big games at Suncorp Stadium, and sometimes during the game, if there's a bit of, I guess, time lapse between each try, the stadium gets a little bit quiet. Obviously, it gets loud when there's an exciting play here or there, but I think English fans do a great job of just keeping that atmosphere rolling throughout the whole match, and it's something that I'm very grateful I've been able to experience. And
absolutely, yeah.
I think English fans should commend themselves, and
we just need a few more of them. That's the trouble, Jake. Our attendances are not as good as they should be in some places, and that's quite interesting, isn't it? The NRL has seen a massive surge in attendances this season, and it's interesting to sort of reflect on why that is and why we're not getting the same boost in crowds.
And especially considering that both competitions have been very competitive and quite close.
Absolutely.
Especially heading towards the end of the season. So, who knows, maybe it does just take a good season for, maybe a few seasons in a row for those fans to start showing up. But, fingers crossed we can get some more marketing. We've been harping on it.
Well, yeah. The difference, of course, is that in New South Wales and Queensland, rugby league is the major sport, isn't it? I think it's fair to say. Whereas here, we're a bit further down the scale, really. And although rugby league is a major sport in the towns where it's played, it's not a major sport in terms of national media, who don't give us that much coverage. So it's harder for us to draw new fans in, I think.
Yeah, absolutely right. But I'm looking forward to seeing hopefully a few full packed crowds heading into the playoffs. I'm sure
I'll tell you what's interested me as well about Australia recently, while we're still on Australia. I've been watching the highlights of the NRLW games, and some of those highlights are really tremendous. The women's game in the NRL has really come on in leaps and bounds, and there are some real star players in Australia at the moment, including one or two English girls who are playing over there. So I really do think that there's been a big upsurge in interest from women in rugby league in Australia, and it's partly because so many women now are playing in the NRLW competition, and long may that continue. And it's going to be really interesting to see who wins that competition, as well as the men's competition, I think, this year.
Absolutely. Let me just propose this question to you. It's a little thought I had over the past 2 weeks. Would it almost be of interest to the women's game to potentially stagger the English women's competition and the NRLW so that players have the opportunity to potentially come over here and play, and then English players have that same opportunity to come to the NRLW to play, given that the NRLW does start sort of mid-season in the NRL?
Well, yes, they play at different times. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea, because the NRLW season is shorter, isn't it? Significantly shorter. I think is it something like 7 or 8 weeks out, plus playoffs? I'm not quite so sure, just offhand. But and you could easily do that. You're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of English players would, I'm fairly sure, welcome going over there to play a part in the NRLW if they got the chance. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of NRLW sides would welcome them on board, and it's an idea you ought to float to the relevant authorities, Jake, because I think it's a good idea. Yeah, good thinking.
Might make a few calls.
Absolutely.
We might be able to dive into that, and how that might work in future episodes. But we better get into the weekend's games. Obviously, we had the 2 televised games. We'll start with Wigan 26 defeating Salford 8. Quite a strong showing from Wigan. What did you make of their performance?
Well, the season, we've got Old Trafford coming up at the start, near the start of next month, and as far as I'm concerned, all the signs leading to Old Trafford say Wigan and St Helens on them. I can certainly see that those 2 clubs being involved in on the big day, and Wigan comfortably dispatched Salford, didn't they, on Friday night? I mean, the crucial moment was right at the very last moment of that half, the first half, when Mark Sneed kicked a high ball. They got a penalty right at the end of 40 minutes. They kicked a high ball into the heart of the Wigan defence, and Wakefield picked it up and ran with it and ran 85 metres to touchdown for a fabulous try. And, in those circumstances, you ought to learn your lesson never to kick the ball to Wakefield in broken play. Yeah. And that's what they did. They obviously relaxed a bit, I think, thinking that it was at half-time virtually. And probably the Salford players thought nothing was going to come of that kick. And Field just ran through them and scored a wonderful try. And that put them on to 20 points, and that was game over, really, wasn't it, at that point?
Yeah, that's right. And that's one of the dangers when you do chase points at the end of a half, because we saw basically the defensive line coming through. They were all chasing the ball, but no one had eyes for what Wakefield might potentially do.
No.
I had a really good coach growing up say to me that if you're going to put an attacking bomb to one corner of the field, the opposite winger should come across, say, 20 metres behind the defensive line just to cover for...
Absolutely.
If there's going to be a break and play. And you do see it very often, especially with the way that clubs like to tap the ball back these days.
It would be very interesting, wouldn't it, to know to what degree clubs in their coaching processes actually do what you've just said, which is to look at what happens if a player, because, of course, it is broken play, isn't it? You put the ball up and you're never quite sure what will come of it, really. So you need somebody, in backfield ready to challenge anybody who does come through. And Salford didn't have it, did they, unfortunately?
That's right. And I did that exact play. I was able to cut a little snippet for our TikTok page. You can follow that at League Express on TikTok, and it got quite a lot of interaction from Salford fans that were sort of pulling their hair out a little bit. Yeah. I guess Wigan are really establishing themselves heading into the back end of the season. Moving on to our other televised game, Warrington 66 defeated Castleford Tigers 12.
Well, everything turned on a sin bin, didn't it? Because Jacob Miller got sin bin for a dangerous tackle. He's been suspended for one game, by the way, since then. And while he was off the field, Warrington scored 4 tries. So they turned an 18-12 scoreline into a 42-12 2-12 scoreline within 10 minutes. So, by the time Jacob Miller came back on the field, the game was lost. And Warrington were able to score 4 more tries after that. I felt really sorry for Castleford, actually, Jake, because, they had a couple of head injury, assessment injuries that players failed. Young Sam Hall, who scored their first try, and George Lawler, the prop forward, or hooker, as he was actually playing on Saturday. And then Shabel Tassipali, the Lebanese international, who started playing for them recently, he went off with a hamstring problem. So they were down to 14 men, effectively. And by the end of the game, they were looking really pretty shattered. And it wasn't too surprising. I mean, Warrington are the sort of team that can run away with a game if they just pick up confidence. They've got so many players who are great runners, lots of pace, George Williams, Matt Duffy, and so on. Matty Ashton, obviously, is a very pacey winger. And they can do that to anybody if they've just got the confidence and they feel as though they're on top of the game, and they did it, and really put Castleford in a difficult position, because going into that game, Castleford were 2 points ahead of Wakefield at the bottom of the league, and they were 44 points ahead of them in terms of points difference. But because they lost by 54 points, and Wakefield lost by a much smaller margin, I think 16 points against St Helens, they've now got a points difference gap of only 6 points. So if Wakefield were to win a game, for example, this weekend Wakefield play Catalans, and Castleford were to lose to Hull, then you might well find that if they were on the same points, Wakefield would be ahead of Castleford with a better points difference at that stage. Having said that, Wakefield is certainly not guaranteed to beat Catalans, and I don't think Castleford are guaranteed to lose to Hull. I think Castleford have got a great chance against Hull this weekend, but they do need to improve a bit from Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another sign of how close the end of this season is. I think Danny Ward, he was quite brutally honest in his post-match presser, and didn't leave any excuses out there. He said that there was a few passengers on the field in that loss.
Well, Danny Ward, normally, when you see him on the sidelines, he normally has a smile on his face, so it's very easy to see him having a smile on his face, but he looked really glum and serious, not surprisingly, at Warrington on Saturday, and probably realised at that point what a big job he's taken on if he's going to make sure that they avoid relegation. The good thing for them is that games are running out for Wakefield, aren't there? Only three games left, and Wakefield have to get some wins from somewhere, and it's hard to know where those wins are going to come from.
I think looking at the two schedules as well, it seems as though Wakefield have the tougher schedule heading into the playoffs. So they might need a few upset wins to sort of establish themselves. Moving on, we had Kingston Rovers 26 defeated Catalans Dragons 18. The second loss in a row for Catalans Dragons.
Yes, they've just run into a bit of a speed bump, haven't they, the Catalans? And they're now, I think, second in the league behind Wigan. But all three of Wigan, Catalans and Saints are all on 34 points. So none of them can afford to lose any more games if they're going to finish in the top two. And of course, it's important to finish in the top two because the top two teams get a bye in the first week of the playoffs. It's funny, isn't it? Playoffs work differently everywhere. In all three of our leagues, there's a different playoff system, which is just ridiculous. Yeah. And of course, the playoff system is different again in the NRL. So, put your hand up for which one you like. Maybe that's a good reader's poll question, actually. Yep. Which is the best playoff system? Yep. When I might run this coming week. It's important to finish in the top two in Super League, and I have a funny feeling that Wigan and Saints might be the two who do it, and might then go all the way to the grand final.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sort of get too much into the psychology of it, but I reckon it's because the field, the dramas that they had at their home field down in France with the fungal infection. I think that's sort of given the squad itself, they're a bit of an infection in terms of the trophy
knows?
Hopes.
Who knows?
Moving on, so we had Leeds Rhinos 28 defeated Hull FC 12. A good win for Leeds.
Yeah, and that's ended Hull's playoff hopes. They can't now make it in the top the top six. Leeds can do still, but they're 4 points behind the sixth place team, which is Hull Kingston Rovers, and they only have 3 games left. So it's absolutely vital that if Leeds are going to qualify, not only do they need to win all their remaining games, starting this weekend with Wigan at home, which is a very big ask indeed, but they have to hope that Warrington or Hull KR lose at least two out of their 3 remaining games as well. Not impossible, but probably really unlikely, I would think.
Yeah, exactly right. Moving on to the 2-part game, we had Lee 34.
Just worth mentioning, before we leave Hull and Leeds, Sam Lissoni scoring a hat-trick of tries, prop forward. When he scored his 3rd try, if you saw the video footage, he looked absolutely delighted. He scored it at the end where the Leeds fans were. And, I'm almost be surprised if he wasn't still celebrating there. Yeah. And it was the first try he'd scored for Leeds. He never scored a try for Leeds earlier in the season, but to then score 3 at once, it's amazing, isn't it?
It was almost 20 games, wasn't it, for him to get his first?
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
It rains at pause. So congratulations. Yeah. All right, well, moving on to the Lee Leopards match against the Giants, 34-16, Lee won. This is the game that had a bit of controversy around the rescheduling due to a floodlight issue, I believe. Image
of the week in League Express is the floodlights going out and people sort of looking at each other in darkness, wondering what on earth was going on. Maybe it was just another brilliant gimmick by the Leona Derek Beaumont, that they were going to switch the lights back on again immediately and he was going to have a good laugh at everybody. But no, that wasn't what it was. It was a genuine power failure. I'm still not sure. I've not read yet what the problem really was, but of course it meant that the game had to be abandoned after 48 minutes, with Lee winning 16-12 at that point. And the RFL board of directors had a difficult decision to make, whether to order the game to be completely replayed or whether to do what they actually decided to do, which was to recommence the game as at 48 minutes with the same teams and the same refereeing squad and so on, and get back to Lee on Sunday afternoon. And they did, and Lee Lee ended Huddersfield's playoff hopes by winning the game and boosting their own chances of finishing the top 4, which they almost certainly will do, I think.
Yeah. Restarting that game at 48 minutes, was that the right decision, do you think? Or resuming that game, I should say.
The thing is, if they'd said the whole game had to be replayed from the start, a couple of questions. When would they have played it? Would they have, they couldn't, would they have played it on Sunday afternoon or would they have played it at some midweek time? We're getting very near to the end of the season, so the amount of time available to fit an extra game in isn't very great, and I don't think either team would have welcomed an additional midweek game just before the playoffs were due to start. So in the circumstances, I think it probably worked quite well. Obviously, it worked quite well for Lee. Ian Watson, the Huddersfield coach, was a bit more outspoken, saying he thought the whole game should have been replayed, but it wasn't, and the result's in the paper, isn't it? So it was resolved in the end, but in a way that nobody would have expected they'd be turning up on a Sunday afternoon at Lee. How many games? If you think about, it kicked off on Friday night at 8:00 and ended on Sunday afternoon at roughly 3:30. How many games have lasted that long in rugby league history?
That's right.
Not many.
Couldn't think any off the top of my head.
No.
I sort of tend to feel for the players, because obviously Lee Leopards, they tend to play a lot of their middles for very big minutes. Like they'll play, a full half before they look at making that interchange. And I just wonder how some of Lee's middles felt heading into Sunday with the second day soreness syndrome a lot of players tend to get. But obviously not. It seemed you'd think that they'd be disadvantaged, but they came out and
no, they weren't.
The job.
They weren't. They just obviously played well, and actually they extended their lead. It was 16-12 when the game was called off, and 34-16. So they extended a 4-point gap into an 18-point one. So that, good for Lee. That's and it's interesting because Lee had that terrible result a week earlier against Hull Kingston Rovers. But I did say I thought that might be the last sort of gasp of their reaction to winning at Wembley. And after getting such a bad result at Hull KR, I thought they would be over Wembley by then, and it looks as though they are. It looks as though they're on track now and looking towards Old Trafford. And wouldn't it be amazing if they could make it to Old Trafford?
Oh, absolutely.
After winning at Wembley.
Yeah, that's right. It was a much needed win, that's for sure. And moving on to the final game, we had Saints 32 defeated Wakefield 16.
Apparently Wakefield played extremely well for much of the game, but Saints were just able to take their chances in a way that Wakefield weren't. So, but the good thing for Wakefield is that they restricted St Helens to only a 16-point margin, which was almost as good as getting a win, really, in a strange way, because as we said earlier, they now only need to win one game more than Castleford for them to probably have a better points difference than Castleford. So, it's a real challenge for them. Having said that, but anything's possible. It's certainly an exciting end to the season for both Wakefield and Castleford. I'd hate to see either of them go down. I don't believe in relegation, Jake, and I think it's a crazy system, but it's one we've got. And obviously, it will happen to one of these teams.
Yeah, that's right. I thought just watching the highlights, just to even be able to score a few tries against that St Helens defensive line, starting to show a bit of form heading into the back end of the season. And I believe, I don't know if I read this correctly, but would that be David Fafita's last game? I hear that his wife might be going into labour soon. It might be his last game.
I don't know. Maybe they've decided that already by the time we go out online with this broadcast. But his wife is due to give birth very soon, and obviously David would presumably like to be there for that very happy event. So if he does go, that'll be a real shame from Wakefield's point of view, but obviously great from his wife's point of view. But I mean, Wakefield, I think he's come back and instilled a lot of confidence into Wakefield, and if they can maintain that, even if he does go, they'll have a chance of picking up at least one more win from somewhere. But of course, from their point of view, that's relying on Castleford not getting a win from anywhere. Mm-hmm. So it's all to play for.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Now we'll move into a few of the news headlines that are circulating this week. I noticed in the column you wrote this week, Martin, you spoke on the need for a bit of protection around some of the comments that have been thrown at our referees and the abuse.
Yeah.
Would you like to touch on what you wrote in your column? And
well, Marcus Griffiths, obviously, he published on X, the site formerly known as Twitter. He published the detailed online abuse he'd received from some anonymous idiot, homophobic sort of stuff, which is pathetic, really. And the frustrating thing for me is that we can't immediately put the finger on whoever it was who sent that to Marcus. But it's a wider issue because in rugby league, referees have to tolerate an awful lot of abuse. It's not just homophobic abuse, and I've no idea whether Marcus is gay or not, and it doesn't concern me whether he is or not. But any abuse of that sort, or the sort of abuse that that sees people using appalling language towards referees of any sort, I think it's about time we really stepped on it and stopped it. And we've got this long history in rugby league, really going back to when I was a kid, really, where referees, were thought to be the justifiable target of fans' frustrations. And I can remember back in the 60s, referees being called awful names by supporters. And I just think in the modern era, we should be too civilised to behave in that way. And I think, any club, either professional or amateur community club or whatever, that hosts supporters engaging in that sort of language towards referees, there should be sanctions taken against them. And, the sanctions could be of various forms. Fines, for example. You could even find points being deducted from a club. For example, there have been examples, haven't there, of clubs being deducted points in various football leagues and so on for things that their fans get up to. And very often you do find that nips it in the bud, and... But it's interesting, even in Australia, I did make a reference in Australia to Ben Cummings, who's retiring this year as a NRL referee, saying that he advised his son to become an AFL umpire because in AFL they don't get abused as much by the fans. Well, that's who can blame him for saying that? But, that's a real bad a bad thing for rugby league, I think. So, in my view, referees have the hardest job in the game. I would hate to be a referee because I don't think I'd be good enough to be one. I know how difficult it is to referee well, and let's give them a bit of leeway. They're going to make mistakes occasionally, as anybody does, but let's not pile in on them and hammer them for any mistakes that they do make.
That's right. And it has a domino effect, and we see it at all levels. But how are you going to convince a kid to want to pursue refereeing as a career when they're seeing all this abuse heard? And obviously when there's a referee telling his own son, I don't want you to become an NRL referee.
Well, it's amazing actually how many young people do step forward to become, wanting to become referees, and it's great that they do. But obviously the first qualification in the modern world is that you've got to have a thick skin, and you've got to be able to recognise that some idiots are going to call you all the names under the sun, even when you make all the right decisions. So, but yes, it's not a good look, and it's a thing. It's not just rugby league either. There are these problems in football, in rugby union, in other sports where, so some people just love to take it out on the man or woman who's in the middle of the field. By the way, on refereeing, again, historic weekend in the NRL, of course, wasn't it? Because Casey Badger and Belinda Sharp both refereed NRL games, and it's the first time. It's the first time that women have refereed NRL games as a standalone official. I think Belinda Sharp did do some games as a joint referee when there were two referees doing NRL games. I think that helps to draw more people into the game generally. If you can get women interested, then they'll bring guys along as well, won't they? In many families, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to some other news now. We had a news report today that Leeds have signed Matt Frawley on a 2-year deal from next year. What did you make of this signing?
Well, Leeds certainly need some halfback signings, don't they? Because they're losing both Blake Austin and Aidan Caesar at the end of this season. Caesar going back to West Tigers. We're not sure where Blake will be yet, but he does say he has some offers on the table, but not from Leeds. So they need to sign somebody. Matt Frawley was with Huddersfield in 2019. Obviously, that was 4 years ago. He was a much younger player then than he is now, much less experienced then. And I don't think he really broke too many pots at Huddersfield, without not being a bad player, but I don't think it was an outstanding player, and went back to Australia after one season. He's obviously not been a first-choice player for most of the season at Canberra, although he has been getting in recently since Jack Whiten moved to full back. So we'll see. I think he's very much a game management sort of a halfback, which Leeds probably need. So we'll just have to see how that goes. But it will be interesting to see who they sign to partner him as well, because I think, their signings, they're losing quite a lot of players, but they haven't signed that many yet, have they?
Yeah, absolutely right. And especially with that departure of Aidan Caesar.
Yeah.
So obviously a crucial void they needed to fill.
Yes, I mean, they've announced today that Zane Tetevano's heading back to Australia after his health troubles of a month or two ago, which is not a major surprise. But, of course, Nenny McDonald, as we sit here, hasn't, we understand, arrived back yet from Australia where his wife was having a baby, and that situation seems a bit uncertain. So Leeds are in a bit of a rebuilding phase. They've still got a chance of making the playoffs, as we said earlier, but really a very limited one. So, they will have to look very hard at who their signings are. I'm sure they're working very hard on it as we speak. But let's wait and see who else is that they decide to go for.
Absolutely. And another name that has been mentioned, Brenko Lee. He's been released immediately from his contract there with the Dolphins and the NRL. There's been a few rumours circulating over the past few weeks about his links to Super League clubs. I think you mentioned Catalans and Leeds.
Catalans and Leeds are the two favourites. I mean, if he came to Leeds, it would be presumably to replace Nenny McDonald. And I think it'd be a good signing. I think it'd be a good signing for anybody. He's played at the highest level, played for Queensland, played for Melbourne Storm. He's a very experienced guy who I think has potentially quite a lot to offer. So I would think the Catalans might be the first in the queue there, though, because they are losing quite a few players as well, and they'll be in a rebuilding phase too, won't they? So, there's quite a lot to think about for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, he's played under some great coaches with Wayne Bennett and Craig Bellamy there. He's probably considered a bit of a veteran back in that Dolphins squad, so I'm sure he can bring some great knowledge and experience to any Super League.
Of course, they're replacing him with Herbie Farnworth next year, aren't they?
Well, that's right.
From the Broncos. So, that's why they feel they can let him go. And Oliver Gildart, they can let Oliver go as well. And, I'll never understand why Oliver didn't make a single appearance for the Dolphins this year. If I see him, I'll ask him, of course. But I've not seen him since he came back to this country to play for Lee, and of course he's going to Hull KR next year. So it's a merry-go-round, isn't it? Really, with players moving from club to club.
Yeah, that's right. And it's always fascinating. I find learning from players their different experiences of their interactions or being coached by Wayne Bennett, obviously.
Some love him and some hate him.
That's right. In Richard's book, I think Sam Tompkins gave a pretty honest.
He hated him.
Yeah. So, no, it'd be interesting if we could maybe get Oliver on one day to prod him with a few questions about Wayne.
Yeah.
Moving on. So, obviously, we had the final round of the NRL season over the weekend, which saw the Penrith Panthers take out the minor premiership. We saw Broncos go down to Storm in a matchup where both sides opted to rest their players. And we also had the final 4 spots in the final 8 decided. It was a very close finish for those final 4 spots, and a few results were pivotal.
I'll tell you, the club of the year for me so far is, apart from the Warriors, is Newcastle Knights, who have won 9 in a row to finish in 5th place. It's not, 9 weeks ago, nobody would have said they would be in the top 8. And they've risen just as South Sydney have fallen, haven't they? 9 weeks ago, I suspect that South Sydney were probably at or near to the top of the league, and yet they've finished 9th and out of it, which is amazing, really.
That's right.
And there's been a lot of disruption at that club, but the Knights and Dominic Young, did you see his tries?
Yeah.
Scored at the weekend. I mean, what a player he's become.
Yeah, he's going to be a huge loss for them. Obviously, he's signed with the Roosters next year. And I tell you what, NRL clubs must be getting sick of the Roosters poaching their talent and young stars.
I'm sure they are.
He's obviously...
Well, all I can say about the Roosters is we talk about the salary cap, and the Roosters must be the best managers of the salary cap ever, because they can fit so many great players into one salary cap where other clubs don't seem to be able to do it.
Oh, yeah.
They're marvellous.
It's you need a really good accountant, I guess, or someone who can work
sure
the
you
books.
do.
They're a bit of a joke in the NRL community back home. A lot of people call them the salary cap sombrero, where they can just fit all these players under their salary cap sombrero. So Nick Politis is doing a good job there. But he replaces another player that they poached from the Rabbitohs, Joseph Suoliti. So,
Suoliti won't be leaving the Rabbitohs. The Roosters, though, will he? I don't think at the end of this year.
I think he's got one more year, and then he's off to
more year, then he's off to rugby union.
He's on a huge contract with Rugby Australia. I think it was like 1.5 million.
Yeah, something like that.
Wouldn't it be nice?
And I don't think they can afford it actually, but that's up to them.
Well, that's right. I think there was a bit of argument that they should put that money towards grassroots rugby union in Australia. But now, I guess looking towards this weekend's matchups. The key one Friday night, Broncos versus Storm. We're seeing a lot of players who were rested last week come back into that matchup. Just a few notable names for the Broncos. We had Adam Reynolds, Patrick Carrigan, Payne Haas, Herbie Farnworth, Reece Walsh. So they're all coming back for the Broncos, and on the Storm, you're seeing players like Cam Munster, Jerome Hughes, Nick Meaney, Harry Grant, Nelson Asafa-Solomona.
Actually, what will be interesting for me is to see whether they retain Ryan Pappenhausen and young Falongo in their squad, because they both had great games against the Broncos at the weekend, and such exciting players. There seem to be so many exciting players in Australia at the moment. And of course, Pappenhausen's a great fullback, but of course, Nick Meaney has had a great season in his absence with the Storm, and you could hardly drop Nick Meaney, could you? So, and on the other side, you've got Reece Walsh at fullback for the Broncos, who's been absolutely outstanding this year, not just for the Broncos, but for Queensland as well. And, what an exciting game that promises to be. Yeah,
exactly right. And I think there has been an update. I think Pappenhausen has kept his spot in the side, but he'll start off the bench in that 14 utility role. Unfortunately, I think Falongo didn't make the cut this week. Scary times knowing that Melbourne have him in their system and that they can unleash him at any moment. Obviously, a Victorian Storm local junior as well.
Yeah, the fifth local junior who's ever made a debut for the Storm. And that's great to see. And I mean, obviously, everybody knows that Victoria is the home of Aussie rules, and people in Victoria are obsessed by Aussie rules, really. But there are a growing number of junior rugby league clubs there, and he's the latest player to make his debut who's come through that system. And let's hope in future there will be a lot more of them from where he came.
Fingers crossed. In the second matchup, we have the Penrith Panthers taking on the Warriors. Obviously, the Penrith Panthers played their full-strength side last weekend. I believe Jerome Luai won't be playing this weekend in that matchup. But, I mean, they had a convincing win over the Cowboys last weekend without him.
The Warriors have got to keep them out early on, haven't they? I mean, I think the lesson from playing Penrith is you've got to keep them scoreless in the first 20 minutes. And if you can, then you've got a chance of winning. I mean, St Helens showed that at the start of the season in the World Club Challenge. And, other sides have beaten them this year at Penrith, but not many. But Penrith do seem to be on a roll as they... Penrith are very much like St Helens, aren't they, and Wigan. They seem to time their best form for, the most important time of the season. And, credit to them and credit to their coaching and playing staff. But I'd love to see the Warriors win, if I'm really honest about it, because I'd love to see the Warriors get to a grand final. I mean, it's been so interesting to see how much support the Warriors have got in New Zealand this year. There's that great thing, the Up the Wars shout that they all have now, which has been adopted by quite a few commercial organisations in New Zealand. And, for them, if they could just get to the grand final, it would be a fantastic achievement. And, of course, if they could win it, it would be an even better one. And it's just great to see rugby league doing so well in New Zealand. And there must be a very strong case for having a second NRL team in that country before too long, I would have thought. And, I think, obviously rugby union is still the national game in New Zealand, but I think rugby league is on its way to challenging it, really.
That's right, and the sellout crowds that we've been seeing in New Zealand can only help bolster that.
Absolutely.
But also, it's from an NRL standpoint, the amount of things that they had to go through those years of COVID, being away from their families, living in Australia, and those fans over there as well. They didn't get to see a home match for 2 years, I think, or 2 and a bit years, and I think it's a tremendous success what Warriors have achieved this year, and it was absolutely crucial to be able to retain that fan base that they did well this year. And to be quite honest, they haven't had a lot of help from the NRL in making up for that sacrifice.
They never do, really. The NRL is very Sydney-centric, in my view. Not many, they don't look far beyond Sydney, do they, to give help to clubs. And the Warriors have had to do it all themselves. But, of course, that's a great thing because they've succeeded without help from anybody over the Tasman Sea. And let's just hope that it can continue this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, and obviously, we'll quickly touch on Coach of the Year candidate Andrew Webster. You have to think he'd be a smoky for it.
I think he's 100% and everybody else is 0. It's got to be him.
Yeah.
And Sean Johnson for Dally M medal winner, I think, potentially.
Yeah, that's right.
For a supposed veteran, he's had an incredible second lease of life.
Absolutely. Everyone was writing Sean Johnson off after he departed from the Sharks. Obviously, it was a nice fairy tale homecoming to go back to the Warriors, but I don't think anyone expected him to succeed at this level.
As he has. No.
And obviously, if any of those people out there that have got the pleasure of watching Sean Johnson as he came into the league with how explosive and how agile he was, he's really transformed his game into a true playmaking half now where he's lost a bit of that speed and agility and he's focused on his ball handling ability. And
great player.
Yeah, just awesome work from the Warriors. Moving on, I can't quite remember. I think it might have been the Roosters match up on the Saturday
night, yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be an interesting game. Obviously, we saw the Roosters beat the Rabbitohs in that rivalry matchup last weekend to get into the finals. They had to have a few results go their way as well, but could this be a case of Roosters really starting to hit their strides?
Well, the Roosters are another team that starts doing it at the end of the season, aren't they? And the Sharks are notorious for not being able to win playoff games. So I think the script is already written for this game, and it's up to the Sharks to try to rip the script up and show that they can win playoff games. Obviously they've got Nico Hines, who's a terrific player at halfback, who will be doing his damnedest to make sure that they can win, but I really can't see them beating the Roosters. There was quite a bit of controversy, incidentally, about where this game should be played, because PointsBet Stadium, which is the Sharks' home ground, only holds 13,000 people. It's being partly redeveloped at the moment, whereas the Alliance Stadium, which is actually the Roosters' home ground, could house 40,000 people. And some people said the game should have been played there. But, I'm a great believer in the fact that the Sharks finished above the Roosters and therefore earned the right to host the game, even if that's in front of fewer people than would otherwise want to see it. So, I'm very happy with that decision to play the game at PointsBet Stadium.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think if those redevelopments weren't taking place, I'm sure they would, whatever capacity they had, they would have sold it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So, a little bit of a shame, but I'm sure the atmosphere will be just as good with the Sharks home game there. And moving on to Sunday's matchup, we have the Newcastle Knights taking on the Canberra Raiders. Ricky's Raiders heading up to Newcastle for that one. It's going to be I think the game sold out within a few minutes once tickets were on sale.
Very hard to see Newcastle not winning this game. They go into it on the back of 9 straight wins. They've been in fantastic form. Dominic Young playing brilliant for them, scoring 2 tries at the weekend. Spectacular tries, actually, showing incredible athletic and gymnastic ability. So it would be a shame if the Knights didn't win. The Raiders, finished eighth, and they finished eighth last year as well. And you know, I think this will be a fairly convincing win for Newcastle. And it's interesting because that could then mean that they'd probably go to New Zealand to play the Warriors in the next round. You know, which would be a real blockbuster game, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be no easy feat heading across the Tasman to face New Zealand. We touched on how lively their crowds have been this year. So yeah, it's going to be an impressive weekend of football, and I don't know when I'm going to find the time to sit down and watch it all, Martin.
No, that's the problem, isn't it? There's too much to watch.
That's right.
And, you know, I mentioned earlier as well, don't forget to watch the NRLW, which is tremendously entertaining rugby as well. So, every weekend's a great one at this time of the year.
Yeah, exactly right. I've certainly appreciated being able to come over on a Saturday and watch, you know, get up early, watch the 3 NRL games, and then watch the afternoon televised Super League game if there's a Saturday fixture. And yeah, just can't seem to get enough of rugby football at the moment.
No. But is your partner happy with you? Spending so much time.
Well, yeah, my partner, she's quite a rugby league fan herself.
Thank goodness for that.
So, yeah, otherwise I'd be in some serious trouble.
Yes, that's great.
But yeah,
you've picked the right girl.
Yeah, that's right. She's a Central Queensland girl herself, so she's grown up in a rugby league supporting family, so that certainly helps.
Yeah.
Now, I guess moving on, looking forward to the Super League matchups this weekend. Is there any there that sort of catch your attention? I'm just looking, Trinity Catalans, there'll be a good opportunity for the Dragons to
bounce back. Yes, they probably will against Wakefield, you would imagine. No, the really interesting fixture is Castleford versus Hull, because Castleford desperately need to win another game, and Hull will be coming with Jake Clifford suspended. So, you know, their halfback combination of a few weeks ago, Jake Truman and Jake Clifford, has now disappeared entirely. Although Castleford will be without Jacob Miller as well. So, you know, that's... But I think Castleford... I mean, Hull's season is effectively finished now. So I think that gives Castleford a fantastic opportunity to put 4 points between them and Wakefield, and that will be virtual safety for them. So if ever a game, you know, held out promise for the Tigers, then I think this one is it. Yeah. And I can't see Wakefield beating Catalans, but I can see Castleford beating Hull.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Saints versus Lee, that's scheduled to be a bit of a tough matchup.
Yeah, I think Saints will be a bit too strong for Lee now. But I think Lee are going to finish 4th, but I don't think they'll get into the top 2.
Yeah, and a crucial opportunity for Warrington to keep building momentum going up against Salford on Sunday, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I've a feeling that now that Warrington... I don't know why Warrington seem to suffer that incredible loss of confidence mid-season, but they seem now... They've got a fairly full squad as well, you know, they've not got many injured players as far as I'm aware, so... I think George Williams is a really great player, and you know, you could see confidence coming back into all of them against Castleford at the weekend. I didn't think they played that well, if I'm really honest about it. You know, they made quite a few too many errors, but I think they might just be a bit too strong for Salford, and if they are, that will just about end Salford's playoff hopes this year.
And that's right, that scoreline could have been much worse if there was a few
well, it can't be much worse than 66-12, can it? But yeah, it could have been a bit worse.
yeah, there's a few bomb tries, that's for sure.
Yeah.
While we sort of wrap this up, we will remind people, if you do want to grab yourself a subscription of the League Express weekly newspaper, you can head to www.totalrl.com/shop. While you're there, grab yourself a copy of the Rugby League World September issue, and also, I guess, Richard had his day out sort of advertising the book over the weekend.
At Wigan, yes, on Friday night. And, you know, thanks to Wigan, they were really very hospitable towards him. He sold a lot of books there, and, you know, it will be for sale in the Wigan shop all week, hopefully, with people buying it. But if you'd like to buy it direct from us, you can do. We've still not taken a full delivery of the book, but we're expecting it on Thursday this week. So... it's a great book, believe me, and I think everybody will enjoy reading it.
Yeah, perfect. That's 50 Wigan legends in their own words. You can grab that from the same website, www.totalrl.com/shop. We might wrap it up here for the week. Join back next week for the next episode. And while you're at it, I guess we could also plug the YouTube channel. If you'd like to subscribe to the YouTube channel and watch Martin and I discuss the news every week, you can find us on YouTube at Total Rugby League. That's the channel name. You'll find the video on there. And can stream us on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts as well.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
All right, Martin. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch up again next week.
It's a pleasure, Jake. Great to see you again. Thanks a lot.